this is the Pentagon story.
Yes, the Pentagon story.
Pentagon official from Georgia arrested in undercover human trafficking sting. Hopefully they won't make me go through a commercial first.
You know they will. You know they will.
No, they're going to be a commercial.
I hope this letter finds you in this video.
Where's the community movement builders commercial running on Fox 5?
You know what I'm saying?
Here on Fox 5 Atlanta, an undercover human trafficking sting. We want to begin with the story you'll only see here on Fox 5 Atlanta. An undercover human trafficking sting in Coweta County has led to the arrest of 26 people. Good evening, I'm Eric Perry.
I'm Courtney Bryant. Among the 26 is a local man identified as a top children's education official with the Pentagon. Fox 5's Doug Evans has the details.
According to the military publication Stars and Stripes, 64-year-old Stephen Hovanek of Sharpsburg is the chief of staff for Defense Department schools in the United States. The Coweta County Sheriff's Office charged him with pandering, which in Georgia is a misdemeanor. Coweta deputies say he allegedly solicited sex from this undercover officer in a motel room where they had set up a 2-day human trafficking operation.
Arrested 10 for pandering with this operation. We arrested 4 for pimping. 3 of those were looking at further for human trafficking charges. And there was a total of 6 females that were rescued through the operation.
26 people were arrested in the 2-day sting for crimes that included pandering, prostitution, and pimping, according to deputies. These are just some of the mugshots of the men who were taken into custody, according to deputies. Also, the sheriff's office says 6 women who they've identified as victims of human trafficking were offered help.
This kind of operation is really important to us because, number one, sex buyers are a huge part of the problem in the industry. Without the sex buyers, there wouldn't be a market for the females to continue to be victimized. Second, and probably most importantly for all of us, is the victimization of these females. There's not a good scenario for them in this lifestyle. And so the goal is to get them out of this lifestyle and get them away from their traffickers.
Sheriff's Office, put your hands up, hands up. Stand up.
So with the human trafficking investigation continuing, the Coweta County Sheriff's Office says there's the possibility of more arrests and more charges in this investigation. I'm Doug Evans, Fox 5 News in Coweta County.
That's a little bit of a shift too, I've noticed. Like, I remember being as a kid, it would be the sex workers getting arrested, not those, not those soliciting the sex workers. So that's a change. Thank you, your doctor.
Sorry about that. I mean, so I'm a little taken aback by the story. Like I didn't expect the videos of the folks or whatever. But I mean, this is again one of these things where like I see the justice. I see that the sex trafficking, but like these guys are they basically the people paying for sex, basically like the Johns back, whatever. It's just a fucked up system, B. Because I just see like I think it broke my brain or whatever like that. It just seems like a whole fucked up scenario and system. I in some ways, I obviously think people should be arrested, but the way in the scenario in which it was set up.
Yeah, I was going to say
weird or bad, or like this is not also the solution. Yeah, I don't know if I have a lot to.
So it doesn't sound as though, I mean, again, the package was the package, but like it doesn't sound as though the sex workers were willing participants, right? It doesn't sound as though they were arranging their own call. You know what I'm saying? They didn't have the autonomy, right? They were, we heard pimping, which I did not know was an actual charge in Georgia, which
in most states.
I didn't know they called it pimping though. I didn't know it was pimping on the statute said pimping. You know what I mean? Like I didn't know. I thought it had another term.
I think it's probably a euphemism. I think they probably do have another term, but for the general public or whatever. I don't think there's a statute called pimping.
My thing is why are they showing the Johns getting arrested instead of the pimps and the traffickers? That's a little wild.
Well, we don't know who was who. I don't know who was who in the lineups. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I think that was the issue for me in terms of the story, because I'm not sure if they are conflating sex work and sex trafficking. primarily because there's pimps, because I don't think that necessarily makes it a sex trafficking issue per se. Um, I think that's a tricky thing in terms of like that culture. But I don't know. Because I don't know if the solution is arrest. Because I think that when we look at the prominence of sex work and who are the sex workers and the overcriminalization and the laws that are being passed, like the Sesta Foster law and things like that, that has not been rescinded. I'm not sure if this is necessarily a good thing. I know that they always use human trafficking as a means to sort of like Trojan horse criminalizing sex work and sex workers. And that could be anybody at this point because they are flippant with who they decide is and isn't a sex worker, depending on what they want to charge people with. But it didn't read
I think there's
clear
a
enough for me to
video.
really
Yeah,
understand it.
I think at the initially when I saw the story, when they talked about the Pentagon dude, it sounded to me like it was something where they were going to show something or it sounded like he was pimping and or being a maneuvering underage girls or girls like in a high school, so which is obviously to me. But the video was showing like these dudes who look like working class, and it looked like I obviously have no idea for sure that they were paying for sex, basically, like what I mean. And so again, whether or not how that should be criminalized, in which situations that, like you said, Kim, are the women in this particular case having some autonomy over doing such, as opposed to there's a middle person who's setting this up, who's making resources off of the fact that he's controlling women and forcing them in some ways, or making them do this, or being or telling them that they I can offer you protection because these folks are dangerous and so therefore you should do it or whatever. I mean, and even though I understand the space for, even this is another scenario, whatever, in terms of sex trafficking or sex work, I think there's the other issues of the folks who are mostly involved in sex work, which are folks who have suffered, usually not exclusively. I know a lot of times, again, in the type of media environment, folks like to sometimes suggest, oh, these are just people who've decided on their own, who are, under great circumstances, they're going to go into this, right? And normally that's just not the case. As much as we want to obviously make sure people are protected and provide rights if they need to, and or feel this is the life that the job or the work that they want to pursue. But it's a lot of times you're talking about people who have come from quote unquote broken homes, drug addiction problems, poverty, so forth. And those are the issues that are not being addressed,
Right.
so that people are not even in a position to think that this is a life and or work that they want to or need to go into because it makes more money than if they work at McDonald's or some shit.
I mean, there obviously needs to be way more framework. I don't know if state regulation of the sex work industry is what is needed, but this I mean, it's the Wild West. Like I think if you want to be a sex worker, you should be able to be one, without the fear of danger, without the fear of a client coming to harm you. I think there should be something. There has to be some sort of framework in place. And I know, at least I believe, sex work is legal in Las Vegas, and I don't know how that's regulated. I don't know what the license is. I don't know how that works. But for sex work to continue to be unregulated still in 2023, I think is ridiculous, because this shit is happening. It's going to continue to happen. It's happened our entire lives. It happened before we was born. It's going to happen way after we die. So how can we make sure that the people that are in this industry are being protected and can service their clientele in a ways that is safe for them to do so, and that they are well compensated for it's work. You ever had sex? It's work. Okay.
I bet half the tourist money that come in the Dominican Republic is sex work.
DR, Thailand. Let's not even get into what they do to kids. You shorted, like, I mean, and we can talk about what they do to kids right here in America too, though. But
one of the, again, during the special period of Cuba, like one of the things that came back when Cuba felt like, and again, this is not picking on Cuba, obviously sex trafficking and sex work happens everywhere, but in terms of going to Cuba and the idea that the sort of the tourist industry was going to do an additional way to get hard currency in, and this is in the late 80s, early 90s. A lot of huge hotels were built. European tourists were encouraged to come down, and then you saw an increase or reintroduction, let's just say, of sex work, which was not again either regulated and or people looked the other way, and it was, some of it was disturbing because you would go to a beach and see what looked to be some 13, 12, 14-year-old girl with older older white guys on sort of like on public display, and too often than not they seem to be Afro-Cubans than not or whatever like that. So this, I like you said, like this is happening no matter where you are. When economies get bad, or when there's no sort of like either protection or social services, no matter where it is, these things creep back up because human nature is to survive, and survive by what you have to deal or trade with. And people unfortunately resort to, or have to, or are pushed into and or forced into particular lifestyles to survive. So
Right. I think the sex tourism that really puts the question of consensual into place, because it is those certain conditions that drive these, so we don't know to what extent people are saying, this is something that I want to do versus something that I have to do, because it is those conditions, and they're completely exploited because of it, which is why the conversations around sex work look completely different here than they do in the global South, because there's an understanding of the conditions that force people into a particular behavior or lifestyle, as opposed to here in the West, where those conditions exist, yes, especially when you look at more colonized and people of color. But for the most part, when you look at the cam girls and things like that, or the people on OnlyFans, they're people of means that dibble and dabble into this because they want to, so it's less of a question of having to do it. And then I remember a couple years ago with DC, in the case of the missing girls in DC, and all those, truancy and sex work is wrapped tightly with Black girls in DC, because they get charged with truancy under the guise that they are ripping and running the streets doing sex work. So that became a major issue for how people were even discussing sex trafficking and human trafficking around those girls who just were runaways, not necessarily into that lifestyle or into that industry. They were just simply runaways, and there was no explanation for why all of these girls were running away from home. So then it became like this sort of fear mongering around girls are being snatched up from the street, and nobody could actually prove that this was happening in droves in DC, but it was a widespread thing online, that these two things are connected. It's same with immigration, so that's why I caution, like, the way that we talk about sort of regulation, because I know the girls themselves have, there's a reason why sex workers are so good at tech. They have developed ways and mechanisms to protect themselves through that. And what regulations like Sesta Foster has done is strip them from being able to protect themselves in those ways. So now they have to go and meet people directly, and where before they could have like screened them. Right. So that puts them in more precarious situations where they are in danger, where before they had mechanisms and ways. So some of these restrictions and regulations that are meant to protect are actually meant to criminalize these women for doing actions that, as we see politicians take, they indulge in daily. So I don't know. I think it's always a tricky and hard conversation, especially when we talk about things like consent, because how do we really understand consent when there's like, coercion involved, but to what extent, the material conditions of a person. With the same with drugs, right? People who deal drugs are not waking up like, what I want to do? I want to be a drug like dealer. Like, but there's like situations that lead people to wanting to do that. And sometimes it's just people wanting to get into that lifestyle because they think it's cool. And then there's sometimes it's a situation where they see no other choice. So I think that these conversations, especially like with the lumping, are just harder to have.